All right, guys. So just a quick introduction about me. Obviously, I know you guys all, but you guys don't really know about me and my background. Born and raised in the Bay Area, I'm a certified athletic trainer, which means that I went to school for athletic training, got a degree, and then took a test. Now I get to call myself that. What that means is basically I'm a healthcare professional specialized in everything injuries. So prevention, initial diagnosis, treatment of the injuries, and rehab. And my influence into the weight room has come over the last 3 or 4 years. I was at a high school for a while just helping athletes in the athletic training room. So anybody gets hurt, they come see me. I help them get back to their sport and get back into the weight room with the weight room professionals. At a physical therapy clinic I was at for about 1.5 years, I was running the sports performance program there. That's basically right before I moved here to LA. And that was basically taking clients who were PT patients, and then they would get their 4 to 6 visits, whatever insurance gave them, and then they would give them to me basically, and I would finish their rehab, whether it's somebody who's coming off a knee replacement, hip replacement, someone older, or youth athlete, ACL tear, return to play, rotator cuff, return to play, that type of stuff. So that's more of where my background is in the injuries and in that realm of things, but I've really been diving deep into biomechanics over the last couple of years, so that's kind of the stuff that I want to talk about with you guys today, because I think that'll be the stuff where you guys can make like the biggest impact and really will translate into what you guys do with your clients. So that's what I'm hoping to get for you guys today, is just like as much usable information as you can, some new ways of thinking about stuff, maybe things that you can start to implement with your clients, because they're kind of all of our clients, which better for them and better for all of us. So first thing I want to talk about in terms of the squat today is just like, what is it, right? Does anybody want to take a gander at what they want to describe a squat to be? There's no right or wrong answer, really.
I was going to say the transfer of weight to the lower extremities. But
okay, yeah, that's good. I like that.
Dominance,
dropping that
body
body
down, exercise.
I like it, yeah. I would say yes to all those things. For sure, dropping that booty down is exactly right? A squat is going to be more of a vertical descent of this guy right here, okay? So dropping this down in space vertical, which means that the knees will definitely be going forward, which means that we will definitely be transferring more weight to the lower extremity, right? So you guys kind of hit the nail on the head there. There's obviously no one right way to do it, right? There's a million different ways to squat. We'll talk about a lot of them today, whether it's a sumo squat, whether it's a narrow squat. We'll talk about all the practical applications in terms of where we might want to put the load and why, whether we want to go split stance, single leg, all those things, right? We do such a great variety in here. And that's why I like coming here, because I think we do a really good job of giving people different looks and different feels of what they could get out of their body. But just having that next level kind of understanding of when we're doing what we're doing and why we might want to do it, especially as it pertains to our one-on-one clients, right? In the class setting, it's going to be more, let's just get everybody moving different ways. Movement variability is going to be great for them. So that, like we said, just dropping that thing down, man. That's pretty much what it is. So we'll talk about a lot of different things in terms of biomechanical principles, okay? This will be more of me talking, but I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet. In terms of movement options, we really have two. No matter what we do, we have compression and we have expansion. This is one way of thinking about how we move. So compression is going to be more internal rotation, extension, adduction, right? So those movements tend to couple together in what we call compression. That's going to be our compressive forces. So if we're coming up from a squat, let's say, right, and we're putting force into the ground, we have to put internal rotation force if we want to do anything. So just me standing up right now, I have some sort of relative amount of internal rotation that's driving through my pelvis, through my femurs, through my tibias, down into the ground. Otherwise, I cannot stand, right? When you go down into a squat, you need obviously more of that. Like we talked about, the load gets greater. You need more internal rotation to get you back up, okay? So that's going to be our compression. Expansion is everything on the opposite, right? External rotation, flexion, abduction, okay? That's going to be more of our eccentric stuff, That's going to be more of our inhalation, right? When we're taking a breath in, that's going to be more expansive, right? As you can see through the rib cage, when you take a breath in, right, your diaphragm's going to expand, your ribs are going to get bigger, so on and so forth, okay? So we'll talk about that more, but that's kind of the lens at which I look through a lot of the squat stuff, especially when we talk about people, right? Some people have a really tough time getting force, right? You probably have clients where you're like, it's really hard for them to go up in weight, and just a little bit of weight makes them really, really tough. They're just not great at finding compression through the lower legs, basically. And then some will be more compressed, where they're really tight, and that's the people where you're like, ah, man, I got to work mobility with these people, right? So understanding who that might be and how that relates to the squat, we'll talk more about that. Second one here is the limb arc model. Have you guys heard of that? Has anybody heard of that? No, that's a new thing? Okay. So with
the propulsion arc, where you're like as everything moves in this direction kind of deal?
Not quite. That's going to be more of like, this is going to be more of like from a limb. So think shoulder and hip mostly is where you're going to see this, right? Especially with the shoulder, it's a little bit easier to kind of break that down because we'll have basically, hopefully 180 degrees of motion in a shoulder range of motion, right? So 0 to 60. So let's say that's my shoulder at rest. And then as I come up here, that's going to be more expansive in nature, okay? So that's going to be mostly external rotation happening at the shoulder and relative flexion. This is all relative stuff, so in regards to each other and the rib cage and all that. Once we get through 60 to basically 120 is going to be more compressive, so more internal rotation, which is why, like, let's say we're taking a bench press, right? That's highly internally rotated in nature. When you have a bench and you have your hands here, you're pronated, right? That's all internal rotation. And that's at 90, obviously, right? And then anything above is going to be, obviously, 120 to 180. That's going to go back to external rotation, all right? We're going to have a re-movement through the joint, okay? Same thing happens at the hip, but obviously the range of motions are a little bit different, right? So if I'm squatting and I'm starting standing like that, I'm at 0, right? As I come down a little bit like that, that's going to be, that's actually even too much. Say like that, the first 60 degrees are going to be more expansive in nature, okay? More external rotation happening, more flexion happening. This is mostly, we're talking at the hips and the pelvis. So when I say that, that's going to be here, and the sacrum here is a really big part of this, okay? So the sacrum has two movements. It can, well, two main movements in the sagittal plane. It can nutate, which means it can push forward like that, right, if you're looking at me from the side, or it can counter-nutate, which means basically roll back. So that's going to be, the counter-nutation is going to be your expansion. So when we start a squat, we're going to have a relative amount of counter-nutation of that sacrum, which is going to be a little more lumbar flexion, right? When I get to about past 60 degrees of my squat, so as I'm getting towards a 90-degree hip angle here, that's when things are going to change. So 60 to about 100, things are going to change. That's when this is going to relatively start to come forward. There's not this much motion actually happening at the pelvis, right? This is very flimsy, and I made it that way just for the sake of demonstrating these concepts to you guys. But as that comes forward a little bit, right, this is a small movement, but that's going to change. So as we know as well, like once we pass 90, right, a lot of things change in terms of the groin will change its moment arm. So that becomes more of an external rotator, right? Like in the deep squat, when you're driving those knees out and you can really feel your groin working, it's actually changed its lever arm so it can actually help you externally rotate at that point in the squat, right? Or drive your knees out, which is actually going to be internal rotation. And also piriformis, right? We go below 90, that goes from an external rotator of the femur to an internal rotator of the femur, right? So these things are changing as we're going into different movements with our pelvis, with our femurs, all that, right? So 0 to 60 is going to be our expansion. 60 to about 100 degrees, so once I get to about parallel is going to be compression, right? And then once I get below that, I'm going to basically re-counter-nutate. If I can do this properly, this is if you can do it properly, you're going to get that re-counter-nutation and basically flexion through the spine a little bit more as opposed to the extension of the lumbar spine. and you're going to get all of those expansion mechanics again, right? So there's kind of like a give and take here that happens, right? Things are changing. So that's important as we get into the practical stuff. That'll kind of set the stage for why some stuff happens. All right, gait cycle and shin angle. Are we like familiar with the phases of gait? Does anyone want to take a crack at that one?
Take off. What else?
No, that's the Migos. That's the Migos.
No, that's right. Stance, early stance, mid stance.
Exactly, yes. So it'll be early stance, mid stance, late stance. You can call it heel strike, mid stance, toe off. Some people will break it into even more phases of like early mid stance, late mid stance. You don't really need to do all that. The good news is all of this kind of connects with the compression expansion, right? All of it goes together. So from the gait cycle, let's say, we'll call it heel strike for now, right? First phase is going to be heel strike. That's when you're walking forward, your heel hits the ground, right? My shin, as you can see here, is at what we would call a negative angle. So my knee is behind my ankle, right? That's going to be more expansive in nature, okay? That's happening at the pelvis. So this is going to be more counter-nutated sacrum, more externally rotated innominate bone here, okay? Then I come into mid stance because my weight's over me, like we talked about. I have to have that internal rotation. I'm fighting the force of ground, right? Ground reaction force. That's when everything goes into compression. So my whole thigh and my shin and my ankle are going to internally rotate pronate, right? I have to do that because I'm fighting the ground reaction forces now. Okay, and then we have toe off or late stance, which is when I'm coming over and I'm basically externally rotating, right? And I say externally rotating, it's all of them together, right? But I'm resupinating the foot and I'm externally rotating. So you can even see as I pull my pant leg up here, and you guys can practice this yourself, and I'll actually have you guys just stand up with me in just a second and we'll do this together. But you can see as you kind of move through like a gait cycle here, how everything wants to basically turn in, right, as I go through mid stance here. And then as you go to push off, think about like a jump, right? You're going to come down here, you're going to basically put force into the ground, push through your big toe, right? And then as you jump at the very end, you're going to get that resupination. If you think about like a calf raise, right? We want to get that little bit of heel kind of inversion at the end there, right? Because when we're exploding, that's what's going to happen. So even in jumping and squatting, all that, you'll see these same themes, right? Let's go ahead and just stand up real quick. I want to get you guys moving. I don't want you sitting down too long. And just take one foot, and let's just all do our right foot, and let's just go through a kind of a full pattern of like toe to heel and then just coming back. So you'll just basically do a little ankle rocker on the right side. And I want you guys to feel how your shin is kind of moving and your femur's kind of moving, and feel what happens at the ankle as well, right? Whereas that heel hits, your arch is nice and high, and then as your foot comes to the ground and you get over your foot, right, you'll feel more weight going into the inner portion of your foot, right, the medial aspect. And then as we push away, we don't want to keep that heel basically everted. We don't want to keep the foot totally pronated, right? It's going to resupinate to drive us away. So the gait cycle is a really great way to kind of demonstrate those same concepts, and it's going to be a big kind of consideration when we get into some of our exercises, right? Let's say I'm doing a lunge, right? And I'm biasing this front leg. Which phase of gait would this be here? If we're talking about my left leg here.
Is that mid stance?
Mid, exactly, right? Because I'm at a neutral shin angle, right? If I'm doing, let's say I'm doing a rear foot elevated, right? Still talking about the left leg here. So let's say I have the foot even higher. What would this be? Late, right? You guys see how now I have a positive shin angle, right? So it's just like when I was doing gait here, and at toe off, the same shin angle here, right? Where the shin is now moved forward over the foot, over the toes. So now I'm more biasing that toe off, that late stance, right? So if you wanted it, let's say you had an athlete, for practical conversation's sake, and you wanted to get them to be a more effective jumper, right? More explosive. You might want to get them into that toe-off position, that rear foot elevated split squat, because they're going to have to really work on driving with that knee forward, right? That's going to be a little bit, it's going to add some compression into that, okay? So those are just some ways that you can think about how that shin angle, you know, if you had a really wide split squat or something like that, or you were doing like a driving forward split squat, how you would work different phases of gait, and that's also going to dictate kind of what we get from the exercises that we choose, okay? And then, yeah, foot pressures. Does anybody like want to tell me if you guys are like talking about foot pressure with your clients, let's say, right? You're doing a squat and you want them to like get more out of it. What are you guys usually like cueing them for?
I'd say grab the floor with your foot sometimes, or feel the ball of the foot and the heel into the floor. Sometimes if, say like your foot is a talon, you're sort of like trying to reach to the floor with your foot, things like that.
Okay, yeah, nice. What, you were going to say something too? Same stuff, yeah?
Sometimes they
James?
talk about like a tripod stance, like feeling 3 points of the feet, the heel, the big toe, and then by the little
For
toe.
sure.
And then using it to like have equal pressure on all points to, I guess, for stability purposes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's great. Jesse, do you have?
Yeah,
I think I've heard you.
Feet flat, but weight on heel and weight on big toe and the ball of the foot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Raw.
Pete, same deal? Yeah, cool,
I've
awesome.
also been told, like, sometimes to prevent like a valgus or a vastus of the knees, so like imagine you're like standing on like paper and you're trying to tear the paper.
Yes,
You heard that
for
one?
sure. I have heard that one, and
Yeah,
I have
so,
cued people into that
force
before.
rotation.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's going to give you a little bit of that external rotation,
Yeah.
right? Now, and valgus is a big thing that we should talk about too, right? Because, and Pete and I have talked about this before, but valgus probably has gotten a little too much hate, right? Or a little too much maybe misunderstanding from our community as a whole. And when we say valgus, right, like it's sometimes different from internal rotation, right? Like there is valgus in the sense of like, yeah, your knees are totally collapsing and you have no control. And then you look at some of the best jumpers, some of the best sprinters, some of the best power lifters, and you watch them try to get out of a squat and they're all there, you know what I mean? Their knees completely dive in and they are forcing internal rotation to the ground. Same thing with jumpers. You see like a lot of people, especially at the NFL Combine, when they go to do the long jump and you see their knees just drive in, right? And it's like, okay, well, if you're gonna tell me that the strongest power lifter out there has a weak glute med, I'm calling BS, you know what I mean? Like you can tell and then he'll be better. Like, right, exactly. And that's a concept of, right, that's that internal rotation. You got to put force into the ground. The better you can do that, the better you're going to get back up, right? Or the more explosive you're going to be going up. So I'm not saying that everyone should dive their knees into the ground, but there should be movement there, right? We want to have that movement there, especially in relation to the squat. Right, when we come down and we're going forward, like we talked about, those knees got to go forward. If the knees are coming forward, my shins are going this way, I'm dorsiflexing, my ankles have to pronate as well. My feet have to pronate. So the knees are going to come in a little bit, right? So the whole like driving the knees out thing can be helpful if, yes, there's a true valgus, if the person you're just like, oh my God, like you watch them do a single leg squat and it's like this, and they literally can't hold it, then yeah, that's probably somebody that you'd want to throw a band around them for a little while. You don't necessarily need them here on the band, right? But you'd have the band just here as a little bit of feedback, but you'd still want their knees tracking pretty straight over the big toe, right? But just like we worked on with this, whereas that foot came forward, we felt everything turn in, naturally, that's what's going to happen at the knee. So it's okay if that's happening a little bit, if you guys see that. We don't have to cue them to go outside the fifth toe, right? The knees coming forward, the shins moving forward, there's going to be dorsiflexion, which means there's going to be pronation, right?
The whole idea of aiming for like that perfect like line is not necessarily
Right. And in my mind, the further you go forward, the more you're going to have to let that knee travel across. It's going to be more like a J motion, right? So that's just something to think about, right? I think we've gone way too far with the whole must protect valgus at all costs. Now, in here, we're working with a lot of people, especially in groups. You can throw a band on them, that's fine. You can say, hey, because there's so many of them in here, you know, and we're trying to get them to be as safe as possible. So yes, if somebody like does have a terrible valgus and then we have them doing some single leg this or that or whatever, like sure, I'm okay with that, but just for you guys, you know, and for us to all have that open conversation about, you know, we don't want to restrict movement, right? We want to let the natural movement of the body happen, and we want to embrace that. And if we see that it's out of the natural movement where they're really, you know, then that's when we can make it just like any other thing where you say, like, okay, let's change that. Back to the foot pressures, one thing that I really like to do, and I'll have you guys stand up again for this one, but when we load, right, when we're coming down, that's going to be more the eccentric phase, right? Tendons are where we're yielding to gravity, right? We're letting gravity win on the way down. That's going to be more expansive in nature, okay? Because again, compression, putting force in the ground, getting back up, okay? Overcoming that force. So what I like to say is on the way down, 60-40 heels, right? You can say the same stuff, right? Tripod foot, very important. You want to grab you want to be, you want to have some intent through your feet for sure. We don't want them being passive down there, right? Because that's our ticket to the ground. That's our ticket to beating the ground, basically, right? So on the way down, I say 60-40 heels. And then on the way up, I say 60-40 toes, okay? I'm not lifting the heel, but again, I want to push the big toe into the ground, because what that's going to do is that's going to make sure my knees stay forward. So what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to load in through your heels, and then I want you to push up through your heels. And I want you to notice what you feel. And just do a couple of reps there.
So just all heels.
All heels. Yeah.
I feel that more through my hip.
A little bit more through the hip, probably. It's going to be more hingy. Quads. And what's happening is it's going to be a driving back of those knees. When we go through the heel, that's that heel strike, and that shin is going to want to drive towards a negative shin angle. For a lot of people, this is going to be bad because, especially with load, right? If we get them here and their knees start to lock out and their spine's in this position for 9 out of the 10 people that come in here, bad news, right? And then what I want you guys to try next is 60-40 heels and then really push through the toes. Okay, and tell me what you feel differently this time around.
A little taller.
A little taller coming up, okay, yeah.
I feel my calves working.
Feel your calves working, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
But it was like, because you were saying like this, now it feels more like.
Right. Everything's kind of coming up at once, right? What I feel is the peach. Yeah. You guys feel that a little bit? Yeah. Do a couple more of those and see if you can feel your glutes kind of driving you forward. Yeah, when I say the toes, I mean mostly the big toe ball, okay? That's going to be our prime kind of propulsive thing. Yeah.
I also notice a change in the pattern that my body moves.
Exactly.
My hips rise more in the heel, and my torso, like Peter's foot, rises more in the toes.
Yeah.
Like I'm more, I feel like when I shoot back, this wants to happen.
Exactly.
Versus
Right.
this feels like more lifted on the toes.
Well said. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? And you did that, right? Knees come back, then we're more hingy, which is not the end of the world. But in this sense, especially when we're loading people, let's get them pushing through that big toe. Let's get them getting that internal rotation. They're going to get more here too, a little more groin, a little more hammy, and glute, right? Like we talked about, internal rotation, extension, right? So glutes are our extenders of the hip, right? Internal rotators of the hip are going to be medial hamstrings, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, and then the groin, okay? So you're going to get a lot more of that, and like Pete said, they're going to come up more balanced, more here with their knees forward, right? They're not going to be doing that, right? And I'm obviously exaggerating for dramatic effect, but the more we can get people to not use their back, that's going to be a huge win for this gym in particular, right? If we can get less and less people coming in here with back pain and leaving here with back pain, that's going to be huge for us, you know what I mean? That's like obviously the biggest thing with any sort of fitness community, especially CrossFit. And when I tell people what happens here in terms of type of workouts we do, a lot of people go, oh, so it's kind of like CrossFit, right? Like, do you guys get that too when you're talking to people? Not really, sometimes? Yeah.
Like when people come in for like consultations and all that, it's always either or. Like, it's like a sales tactic where we're like, oh, you like CrossFit? I guess like CrossFit. Put like this stuff on the map to the average person, like
Right.
weightlifting and like imams and all that.
Right,
kind of stuff.
right.
So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I'd say I'm like, someone came in the other time and they were like, oh, it's like CrossFit. I'm like, no, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Or we take the best out of CrossFit.
Right.
Use the best.
Because what do people associate? If somebody's like, if we say, oh, it's like CrossFit, and someone's like, oh, what are they thinking?
They're just thinking like a lot of injuries and a lot of like over the top lifting overload. Like you're gonna do the heaviest squats you can for like 2 minutes straight,
Right.
that type of shit.
Right. Yeah. It's high intensity, obviously, and like you guys both said, injuries. Right. For half the people probably that think of CrossFit that have never done it before, they're thinking, oh, that's a good way to get injured. You know what I mean? So we want to be all on a united front of how can we get the most out of what we're doing in here so that people feel really good when they leave. You know what I mean? That they're making gains. We know we can do that because I've seen you guys all do that individually really, really well, make gains. But then also that they're not having to see me, right? Okay, so that's the foot pressures thing. So 60-40 heel way down, right? 60-40 toes on the way up. You can do whatever you want. You can say a little more heel on the way down, a little more toe, whatever you want to do. It depends on your client, right? If they're an analytical one, maybe you give them the numbers, whatever. Relative motion and orientation. Relative motion's all what we've been talking about, right? A little bit of IR happens, right? It's not like your whole limb is whoosh, and then it's all, you know, but it's something is moving on top of something else, right? So when I say that too, this is mostly going to talk about like the tuck, right? Anterior tilt, all that kind of stuff. There's an anterior tilt, which isn't the end of the world, where this comes forward a little bit, right? Relative to the innominate, right? Sacrum on innominate versus the whole thizang. You know what I mean?
So
That's orientation.
when people get into like butt wink and how it's like really bad, what is the bad? What's so bad?
That's a great question. It's an orientation, the butt wink is. So when people get to a certain level, right, they're starting here as they lower. Then as we get to that like 60 plus degree, like we talked about, 60 to 100, right, boom. Then comes the nutation, relatively. They're still dropping. And then what happens is they can't re-counter nutate. They can't get back from ER to IR to ER. They're just going ER to IR, and then they don't have that movement at the pelvis, so then they do that. They go from relative motion to orientation. At the bottom of the squat, when you see, it depends on where it is. For some people, it might be right there, right? You guys have seen that, where they go to do a squat, and you're like, oh, shoot. You know what I mean? They have no movement in their pelvis, right? They have no relative motion, right? They cannot get through those ranges of motion at the pelvis and at the femur, right? And we'll talk about, you know, what you do with something. That person generally is very stiff, and if they can't even get to 60, right? They can't get through that first side. They can't get through that first expansion. That tells us that they cannot internally rotate. They can't put force into the ground. They can't nutate the sacrum, right? They probably don't have a lot happening here in the hamstrings. They probably don't have a lot happening at the groin, right? Those are the areas that I think instantly we need to get them some of that so they can learn how to do this, right? So great point there. And
then I guess like,
yeah.
It's like I've never like what's so bad about it? Like what's like does it cause back pain?
It can, yeah.
Demonized, like I always like I've never seen anybody. I never really know where pain comes from, but I don't know how that's really hurting someone. So I was always wondering what's going on. What would cause the injury in the muscle?
That's a great question. In my it's going to happen somewhere else, right? So if I need to get that, right, which is going to be expansion, which means flexion, down the chain and up the chain here. If I can't get that, I'm going to flex somewhere else. So it's probably going to be my low spine. So then what you have, and you guys have seen that, right? Where they're like this, and then every time they go down, they're flexing. And if you have a bar on them or you have weight on them, right, now they're flexing under load. So that's like 8 times the force that spine, that disc is seeing, right? And it's particularly because that's typically when discs happen, is like a repetitive flexion or at least an acute flexion, especially if it's under load. So like that's going to be your people that have like a slip disc, herniated disc, that type of stuff.
The way I explain that, correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, yeah.
This is the way I explain it with the butt wing. That the squatter is removing the hips, and then next thing in line, taking over
Exactly.
is the spine, right? So that's,
We will get motion from somewhere.
Yeah.
The body is an incredible compensator, right? If you tell somebody to do something, their body is going to find a way to do it the best they can. The question is what's doing it, right? When they get down to that midpoint and like most people sticking point at a squat, right? 90 degrees, getting to parallel, right? Are they getting internal rotation there, right? Are they getting compression here, pelvis and down, or are they getting compression right here, right? Are they driving that spine forward and doing that? They're going to get it somehow. They're going to find a way to get up, right? The question is where are they getting it from? And then that's when it's up to us to say, okay, do I want them doing, 5x5 lumbar extensions with 135 pounds on the bar, right? Or maybe do I want to change this up a little bit? Maybe do I want to throw a wedge under their feet, right? Or whatever it is, see if I can get them to drop a little bit more vertically and find, or maybe I want to do some of the hamstring stuff and the groin stuff, get that going so that they can get internal rotation here and not back in here, right? So it's where are you getting the motion from? Because the body's going to find it. Yeah? Sweet. Okay, that's good. So we'll move on. Assessment stuff. I'm going to keep it pretty brief. How are we doing on time? Yeah. I'm going to keep it pretty brief. What I'm looking for, typically when I have someone do a squat, James, you want to be my? Sure. Yeah. Thank you. What I'm looking for here, why don't you stand right here, is I want to get their feet pretty much hip width, right? When we tell most people, hey, like, do a squat, they're going to be like, all right, cool. All day long, right? When they do that, none of that relative motion stuff happens. When they go super wide feet, it doesn't really happen, right? It allows their pelvis to just drop straight to the ground. So they're not getting internal rotation with that, right? So what I like to do is I like to have them feet where James has his. That way we're actually seeing what he's got, what the pelvis has, okay? So usually what I'd like to do is to take your shoes off and socks if you're comfortable with that. Because the feet are going to tell us a lot. All right. And then I also have him go arms straight out towards these guys. Yeah. And what that's going to do is, number one, as he goes to squat, that's going to tell me if he's rotating at all, right? If I see one hand kind of reach out to me more, number one. And then number two, what I'll do is go ahead and turn around and face the, I'm looking at the wrinkles on his shirt, okay? It's not you, it's just, okay. I'm looking to see where is he compressing, right? Where I see the wrinkles is where I see compression, right? So he's got some compression through here, I would say, not terrible, and you guys see a pretty major dip right here, right? He's living in some lumbar hyperextension, I would say, right? All right, let's go ahead and have you flip back around. And then I just have him do a squat. So I don't try to cue them too much into it. I'm not trying to like have them do it my way. I just want to see what does their body do, right? So I just have them go pretty slow though. So just give us a little squat, go pretty slow. Good, keep going. Have them do a few. Pause there. Which hand is closer to you, Jesse?
This hand, he's going this way. Yeah, left hand's forward.
I would say it's right, actually.
Really? It is right.
Yeah. Here, see from the side, maybe. And then look at his knees. Don't move. But look at his knees.
Because he's going this way.
Right.
So he's rotating.
He's like going this way. right? Good, come on
Is
up.
that like his right, the toe next to the big toe is off the ground?
Correct, yes. So that is going to be a strategy of toe extensors, tibialis, right? They're going to fire because he's afraid of falling back. So they're going to fire to feel like they're pulling him more forward, right? So if you see that, that's he's probably falling back a little bit too much. Maybe it's he needs a little more dorsiflexion. Maybe it's he needs to allow those knees to translate forward a little bit more. And you can tell he's holding that supinated foot, right? Especially on the left side, his ankle like doesn't move at all. So we want a little bit of play when we're squatting, okay? We want those arches to drop to the ground a little bit as he gets towards that sticking point, right? And when he gets to the bottom, they'll resupinate a little bit, right? Like we talked about. ER extension, IR pronation, ER extension, right?
Where is he tight at that forces him to rotate?
That's a great question. Typically, when you see somebody rotating one side or the other, whichever side they're rotating towards, they're going to have a little bit more range of motion in that hip.
You say rotating towards, like, so if his hands go that, so he's rotating.
Yeah, but he's falling into the right.
Right.
He's kind of, so I would say that his right hip probably has more range of motion than his left. So let's see a couple more. See the shift? So stop at the bottom for us, James. And then can you guys see that? Look at his center, where it is in relation to his knees. Can you see that? What do you guys see?
Right on the seats. Where are you?
Right.
Where are you putting force right now?
I can tell you right now, I have more force in my front left foot and my back right heel. So it's like
Right.
this way.
And that's very common too because he's pushing away from the left side into the right? Heel's going to be the loading. He's propulsing through the midfoot, through his big toe, from the left to the right, and you can see the center of his shorts is closer to his right knee, which tells me that this right hip is going to have better hip flexion than the left. He's going to have more range of motion.
So the left is tighter.
Left is probably tighter in hip flexion, right? Which might be this stuff back here, at this range. And so, yeah, can you guys kind of see, just starting to get a picture here, right? So it's just something that you want to be aware of because if you go to say like, okay, looks pretty good, let's throw a bar on you, and then it's like, we're just going to groove the patterns that he's already grooved, but just harder and harder, more and more and more, right? So what you might want to do is try to get him a little bit more hip flexion. What are some ways that we can give people more hip flexion?
Like single leg thrust.
Single leg thrust, like a hip flexion. Yeah. A knee tuck, maybe. Yeah. Are you talking about like a hanging knee tuck or like a supine knee tuck or something?
Supine knee tucks.
Okay. Yeah, that could work. And you said like a pigeon?
Well, I was gonna say a mixture of like piriformis, like stretching your glutes, so like the pigeon pose, and then
Right.
strengthening hip flexors, I guess.
Yeah, that's the right idea, right? It always comes down to that, and people will say it in a million different ways, but like stretch what's tight, strengthen what's, I don't want to say loose, but weak or whatever you want to say, right? Usually that's kind of the case. So yeah, I would say to that, that's kind of what you'd want to do is however you guys like to do. I don't want to like make you do it my way, but just give you the way to think about that, right? So like, all right, he might be a little tighter on that left side, so maybe I put him in a pigeon, for a couple minutes before we're done. I'll show you guys a couple other things that you can do, right? One thing that I would do is get him in like a split squat, maybe a front foot elevated, right? Get him in more of that hip flex position on the left side and see about driving into those things, because then I can drop into that eccentric hip flexion, right, where his glute is actively kind of lengthening under load, right? That's an idea too. Yeah, great.
When you see that, what's your go-to when you usually
So I start by kind of having the conversation of cueing, especially if this is somebody who I'm going to want to squat, right? Some people, it's like I'm just looking to see how they're moving general. Some people, if I know that like a squat's going to be a big part of the program, then I'm thinking, okay, how we can kind of fix that right off the bat. But yeah, I'm going at the left hip probably, and I'm going at just, because sometimes they're just not aware of how we want them to move. So if he's holding that supination for dear life all the way down, right, then we're going to miss out on some power production, right? So I'm just going to maybe tell him, hey, as those knees go forward, just let them track over your big toe, let the arches come down a little bit, right, and just see if we can maybe get some better results from that alone, right? So that's some of the stuff that I look at. Some of the other things that you guys might see, well, what else have you guys seen, like weird stuff in squats? Or if you have somebody...
Really tight ankles.
Really tight ankles.
One ankle that's way less mobile than the other.
For sure. And are you guys pretty comfortable with like dorsiflexion stuff? Yeah, there's a million ways to do it. We've talked about the one with the band, right? Where you put it up here on the bench or whatever, and then you have the band on the talus, right? Pulling down and back, and then you're using that as a mobilization and then driving the knee forward. I will oftentimes just have people find the wall and just do like a knee to wall mode, right? And you want to let that happen a little bit, right? We want that pronation to happen. That's going to give us true dorsiflexion, is if we can have some pronation with it. So I have them go to wall. The wall is nice because they can do it at home. They don't need the super band setup, you know, when they're at home if they want to do that. But that's a good way to do it, and it's measurable, right? They can throw a ruler down or whatever, and they can measure. Typically, we're looking for like 4 to 6. I like, 5 to 6 inches away from the wall is going to be like about 15 to 20 degrees of dorsiflexion. That's what we're looking for, right? That's definitely something that you'll see. And if they don't get that, you don't have to like stop everything that you're doing to get that, right? What's another way that you could bypass that if you wanted to start getting somebody going on a squat? Because you don't have as much time to lose, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have time to waste. These people are coming to you, they want results pretty quickly, they want to feel like they're getting stronger, gaining weight, losing weight, whatever it is, right? So what's a way that we could just bypass the ankles entirely? Choose wedge, right? Why does that bypass the ankle? What happens there?
Puts you more, what is it called, pronation when you go back?
That would be like plantar flexion.
Plantar flexion.
Uh-huh.
So it gives you more plantar flexion, so then you just have more room to move.
Exactly, right? You're just, instead of starting at 0, you're starting at, we'll say, -10. So then that first descent, by the time you get down to, here, instead of being at 10 degrees dorsiflexion, you're just at neutral ankle, right? Which means I can get my 10 degrees that I have, and now I can get down to here, right? So you can do both, right? You can have them, work on some dorsiflexion stuff, right? And then you can put a wedge on them and have them get their gains, but not, and then over time transition them into, a squat that they can have their feet on the ground.
I've always wondered, how much of a difference all the ankle mobility drills and stretches actually make. Because, I've had a lot of people, even myself and other friends, where it's like, they've been doing that shit for years, and it's like the same. It's like, all right, you look the same.
Yeah. And what I would say is that comes back to this. They don't have any of that. So you can do all the ankle stuff in the world that you want to do. You can get 25 degrees of dorsiflexion, and this isn't going to change, right? So that's a big part of it, is you got to address that, but you also got to address this, right?
I feel like people who are decent, a lot of people who are athletes,
Uh-huh.
and who spend a ton of time, like basketball players, any sport where you're sprinting, you see the ankles are super, super stiff because you're always in this position.
Exactly.
So it's kind of those are some of the worst squats you see. People who play sports, because you're always up here. And those are a lot of people where it's looking forever, stretching their calves and doing all kinds of ankle mobilization drills, but never really seeing much improvement.
Absolutely.
That's why I was always man,
Comes back to that, right? Compressive athletes, sprinters, they're going forward, right? They're just going to live here, right? They're going to live tight because when they hit the ground, they got to be stiff, right? They don't have the loading, the temp, you know what I mean? It's stiff. So to your point, yeah. And I have a friend who's the same way. He walked like this, basically with his heels off the ground our whole life, and he played sports and all that kind of stuff. And of course, now he's paying the price for it. But, the ankle stuff's going to help, but it's not going to get you all the way there to your point, right? That's when this stuff comes into play. So if we want to get more dorsiflexion, right, especially as we get down towards here, right, 90, we need more internal rotation pronation, right? Because that's where we're going to get here. So that's going to get us into something where if you wanted to get more of that, what did I say were like internal rotators? Do you guys remember that? We kind of covered some of the muscle groups. Internal rotators of the femur pelvis.
What are they?
Yeah.
Like the adductors?
Adductors, yep. And any others? Okay. Quads. Depends on them, but not really. No, because you only have one that's really crossing there. Hamstrings too, medial hamstrings, right? Semimembranosus, semitendinosus, right? They're going to help create, because they originate right at the ischial tuberosity, right, the sit bones, right? All hamstrings do. So if we can access those, that's going to create movement at the pelvis here, at the innominate. That's going to give us some of that relative motion back.
All the hamstrings are internal rotators. Is that what you said?
Specifically the medial hamstrings, because they come through on the inside. So when they fire, it's here, whereas the biceps fem is going to go on the outside, right? So when it acts on the fibula, right, and the tibia, it's going to externally rotate them because of where it's at, right? So one thing that you guys could do if someone's having trouble through that sticking point, right, or with the dorsiflexion, right, and you want to give another something to them because you're like, well, I've given them the dorsiflexion, they're doing it, maybe it's not getting better, whatever. That's when you can put them into like a 90-90 position. This is what Jesse and I were talking about the other day. Actually, Jesse, do you want to come over here and bring your chair with you? So what I would have Jesse do is go ahead and lay down on your back, and then we'll go put your heels right up here for me. So if I'm trying to get internal rotation and I'm trying to get pronation, all that kind of stuff, why would I want him in this position here, 90-90? If I'm trying to get like internal rotation, compression stuff, right, I'm trying to get him through this sticking point of the squat, right, not the first part. If he can get through there and down into here, and he needs some help with pushing weight out of there and kind of owning that 90-degree range, right, why might I want to put him in this position at the hips?
That's what you want him to look like, right?
Right.
That's the position.
Right, because of that limb arc model, right? We're in this range. We're in that 90-degree range, that middle range, right? So if I want to get him more ER expansion, I'm going to scoot him back. I'm going to get him like 45 degrees at the hip, right? Or if I want to work deep hip, right, I'm going to bring him way, way close like that, right? But because I want hamstrings, groin, I want internal rotators, those hamstrings are going to fire best 90 degrees, okay? 90-90, hip and knee. That's when we can really torch those hammies, okay? So I would get him somewhere like here, and then I would, grab something like this, right? Because how can we get groin? Squeeze. So I'm going to put that right there. And what I'm going to have him do is I'm going to have him dorsiflex a little bit, right? Because we're trying to get more dorsiflexion. I'm going to have him squeeze the brick a little bit. You doesn't have to crush it, right? You just has to get these guys going. Can you feel your groin a little bit? Yeah. Perfect. And then what I'm going to have him do is I'm going to have him take his hands right below his glutes and see if he can find kind of where his sit bone's at. Okay? And then from there, his sit bones, yeah, like where he would sit. Ischial tuberosity, right? So these guys right here, right? So it'll be kind of, it'll be buried beneath the glute a little bit, right? But you guys can find it right now if you just,
Those two bones there is what he's trying to.
that's where he's trying to find right now.
Is that hard? Like,
It's a little harder to find it here.
but if you go here, you feel it, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's the right spot.
You're trying to feel like there and then the attachments.
Exactly. So what I'll have him do is I'm going to have him just barely lift his hips off the ground, like try to scoop his hips, like a little bit of posterior tilt, about an inch.
The activation from the hamstrings.
Exactly. because I want the hamstrings to do that. So when you get a lot of people to tuck, they're just gonna crunch from here and we don't necessarily want the tuck happening from there because that's not super sustainable for them to hold ab contraction all day long, right? But if we can get them to do it, and can you feel your hamstrings kick on when you do that? Yeah. So you'll feel, and you guys can try this too, I'll have you guys all try this, but you can feel the hamstrings kick on underneath your fingers, right?
Yeah, you got to make sure that he understands not to use
his abs. Exactly.
So
So you just have him hold it and then have him breathe. Take a big belly breath, you know, because it's really hard if you're like holding here to take a belly breath. It's just not going to happen.
This is the hamstring, but it's also what I'm touching here is the, what do you call it, hamstring medius?
Medial hamstrings, yeah. So you have two that come down the medial side, and you have one that comes on the lateral side, basically. Right? So we're mostly going medial here because we're trying to get internal rotation. Yeah. So he can feel, and you'll feel it down here too. So what you're trying to cue him into is little tuck. He's barely off the ground here, okay? You don't want them like scooping super hard. That's not the point. We just want to get this fired up. But what I'm going to tell him is, think about this little box chair thing that we're on right here. Imagine it's got wheels, okay? And I want you to think about sliding it towards you.
Towards me, this.
Yeah, exactly. While you hold that tuck. So now he's squeezing here. Now he's actively knee flexing, so he's feeling this a lot more, right? His distal hamstrings, lower down, and then he's also feeling the proximal hamstrings by that sit bone that we talked about, right? So you get him going on something like this, and then you get him going back into the squat or whatever you're doing is going to help him understand how to find those internal rotation muscles and mechanics. And now what he's doing there is he's creating kind of this at the innominate. So he's getting that motion that he needs to get back, basically. Right? So that's one way to do internal rotation. Just to keep it simple, this is one way that I like to do it because it's pretty simple and it's pretty effective. And if he's like really, really good at this, what you could have him do is you can have him try to get both at the same time. So let's say James, right? We know that he needs more expansion on the left hip, but he needed probably a little bit more compression on the right, right? That way, because he was compressing on his left, pushing himself to the right. So we're going to flip it for him. So what I'll have him do is do this on the right side. Right? This right side's going to stay down because we're going to have him compress on the right. And then I'm going to have him take this off and then tuck up for me. And then still pull that, yeah, there you go. And then bring this towards your chest. Good. Right? And I want you to just breathe here, okay? And then with every breath, you're going to try to get that left knee a little closer to your chest. And keep your knee like squeezing in a little bit here. So it doesn't have to be like all the way in, but just keep it here and like imagine that I'm pushing out here, right? So you can still feel your groin on, hamstring. So his right side's now being the propulsive side, the internally rotated, compressed side. And now his left, we're up here now.
And so you talk about like how like a front foot elevated squat, that's that position.
Exactly, that's this position here. Right, that's going to be the expansive, right? So just like you said, James, where we're trying to get maybe stretch the glute, what's happening to his glute on the left side here, this stretching, right? We're taking a hip extensor and we're a deep hip flexion here. So he doesn't even really need to like feel a deep stretch. He might not be like, oh my God, it's not going to be like, it's so tight. I don't know, how'd that feel to you?
Burning.
Burning on the right side probably, right? Yeah, it's a lot of work, especially when you take one off. So if someone's like athletic, you know what I mean? And they don't want to be like, dude, what am I doing sitting here breathing? You know? That's somewhere that you could torch him pretty good, right? But it's got to have the tuck. It's got to have the pulling back towards him, okay? And now you're getting that. So James, why don't you come over here and try this, and we'll see if we can get your squat to look a little different after that. So I'll coach him through the 90-90 first. Okay. And then a little squeeze there. We'll go a little dorsiflexion, okay? Start to dig your heels down into the pad and then towards you, okay? Like you're pulling them towards your butt. There you go. Now, holding that, take a breath for me, because I can tell he's already his nervous system's like, what the hell's going on here, right? So I just want him to relax a little bit.
Relax that.
Yeah. So you want to keep a little bit here. It doesn't have to be, again, a ton right now. And then what I want you to do is I want you to just lift your knees and your hips just a little bit. Keep your low back on the ground, though. Yep. And then I want you to put your hands down here for me and just kind of go right there, and see if you can find that thick ropey tendon. Can you find that? Yeah, so he's found his proximal hamstrings now. That's awesome. Okay, and then he's gonna keep pulling. Can you feel hammies up here too?
A little bit, yeah.
Yep, good. And you can feel groin on the squeeze here. Don't let me pull. Yeah, you can feel the inner thighs. Perfect. So I got him feeling all that now, right? Now what we're gonna do, because he was falling to his right side and his left side didn't have a lot of room, what we'll try to do is, I'll take this out, okay? I want you to still keep an imaginary brick there, so you're still squeezing, okay? Now you're gonna bring the left knee up towards your chest. Keep both hips off the ground, okay? Bring that left knee towards your chest as much as you can. All right, and keep driving down here and in to my hand. There you go, and breathe. There you go. Nice slow exhales. Get all the air out. Every exhale, knee goes a little closer to you. Just go like 2 more breaths.
So he has less range of motion on there than because Jesse was like all of it is. You can see like the limitation there.
Absolutely. Yep. Give me 1 more. Close as you can to the chest with the left knee.
That ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, okay, good. Relax. Come on down. Let's have you stand up. Let's try it again. So now we'll just retest his squat and see how he goes. Let's go hands out. So he's still pretty shifted, right? Still pretty shifted. Let your arches kind of cave a little bit for me, and I'm just going to see if I can get you to where it feels like neutral. How's that look, guys? About right there?
That looks
Okay.
So when I'm in this position,
Uh-huh.
I feel a lot of tightness
Through that left
through
ankle,
this left
right?
ankle.
So then we work that left ankle a little bit, right? And then that's kind of 2 things that you would do, not simultaneously, but in a program, right? You guys are getting going. You start him on that, get his hammies going. You do a couple of these, boom. Whatever you're doing.
I also grip this foot, I noticed.
Yeah, you hold it in that arch. So get back in there. And when you let your knees go forward, just let your arches collapse a little bit, okay? So just kind of squeeze into my fingers here. Yeah, and here too. There you go.
I can get a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And it's really great to have them do this in front of a mirror too, so they can see it, right? Because you guys can see it, I can see it, but they won't necessarily know what you're talking about unless they can see it.
So that stretches, so he presses down on the right, but he brings the left, so you can get the stretch out of the left.
Exactly. That's getting a little fancy, right? That's because we were talking about the hypotheticals of one side versus the other, and I wanted you to show you guys how I would maybe, tailor that towards him. But you could also do that in a split squat. So let's talk about some of the practical applications. So like a split squat, right? We have 1 foot forward, 1 foot back. We're typically going to get more internal rotation on the back leg, more external rotation on the front leg, right? But it also depends on what angle I'm at. So if I'm on the ground here, I'm, pretty mid stance, right? If I go front foot elevated, and let's say I'm here, right? I would say I'm almost more like heel strike here. Heel strike, maybe mid stance, right? But I'm in such deep hip flexion here, right? I'm dropping so deep into this front side that I'm going to get back probably some of that expansion. So another great one for James to work on would be left leg elevated, front foot elevated split squat. Right, yeah, and you guys know how to do that too. You could try a foam roller. You can have them do like a crossover. You can have them do whatever dynamic mobility you guys want to do before. You know what I mean?
It's the backside tissue is the restriction.
I would say so, and the ankle, right? And he's telling you the ankle, so you gotta respect that and be like, all right, we're gonna work that ankle. So maybe you work the posterior side a little bit. If it's just have him do like a foam roller on the on his calf, right? Or if you guys have another tool you like to do for that, or another, But then you can have him do like an active dorsiflexion thing too, like a tibialis raise, right? Where you have him park his hips here, just to James's point of like stretching the stuff on the back, right? And then strengthening the stuff on the front, and have him pick up more dorsiflexion actively, especially after you do a stretch. It's good to strengthen the antagonist right? Because then you just created this new range of motion here. And if you're not going to actively use that, and you will if you're in a squat, right? But if you're just going to do that and be like, all right, cool, let's go do bench press, then you're kind of leaving some gains out on the table, you know what I mean? Because you want to strengthen within the new range you've created. Okay. Yeah.
Skipping ahead.
Yeah, that's fine.
We're going to talk about fixes. So,
Yeah.
how much does anatomical, like the way some of your bone structure is?
Yeah.
Like, I've heard a lot of people talking about like the femurling being a big determining factor in anything squat related. How do you assess whether it's that or something else?
The short answer to that one is practically you try everything else and nothing's working. Yeah, trial and error. It's a huge emphasis, there's a huge factor of that, specifically as it pertains to their shape of their thorax, right? If you guys have heard of like wides and narrows before, you've heard of that? Yeah, there's classifications of the ISA, which is the infrasternal angle. So basically the angle that my ribs make below the xiphoid process here of my sternum. That's going to divide people into two categories that are going to change the way that they move, right? So you're a wide. I'm a narrow. I'm going to be better at the expansive stuff. I'm not as good at putting force into the ground. I'm not going to be a power lifter, probably ever. It's very rare that you see a narrow that's a power lifter. He is more compressed because of the shape of his rib cage. He's going to put force into the ground better, right? He is going to be able to be like a power lifter or something like that. Because I'm narrow, though, I'm going to rotate better. So I'm probably going to be a golfer or a baseball player or something like that, right? Or not, I'm going to be that, but I'm more likely to be better. So yes, to answer your question, there is genetic factors on that dictate how well you'll move. And you can change that to a certain degree. You can make it more dynamic, but you're never not going to be like a wide, you know? So, but that's a conversation for another day. That's pretty deep. So, and
With the ankle too, right? Because there's some people where their ankles just, the bones is just
for sure, yeah. And some people just live in pronation more if they're more flat-footed, right? And some people, right, like their bone structure is going to be different. Yeah, so that's a huge part of it, you know? And you just have to that I would say, focus on the relative motion, right? Even if they're flat-footed, they can still supinate, they can still pronate. You still want to make sure that when you're watching them squat, when you're watching them move, that they're not, you know, here all day long, that they're, you know, not supinated all day long, right? And that's partially because a lot of us have maybe chosen to do that. But again, make sure that they have that relative motion a little bit, right? You just have them do this and see if they can supinate, pronate, stuff like that. So yeah, and there's not much you can do, but they're coming to you, they want to get stronger. It's like, you're not going to like not take somebody and there's always something that you can do to make them stronger, to help them out with what they're doing, you know? But yeah, some people will just be, it'll be more of an uphill battle than others, for sure. I want to get to some of this practical application stuff too. So we talked a little bit about IR and ER, right? Or just picking up with this type of stuff, right? Getting the hamstrings involved, groin involved, if they need more help from that kind of like 0 to 90, right, for the most part. And then external rotation, like we talked about, more expansive stuff, working deeper into hip range of motion, stuff like that. You know, you could get them in a long seated position too, right, where they're like sitting basically on the ground, and have them doing like, you know, down here where their hips are below their knees, and have them do your lat pull down or whatever else they're doing upper body wise, or I just start to think about the hip ranges of motion and how you can get them in a position where they can sit. Some people, I just give them a goblet, you know, a dumbbell, and just, or a kettlebell, have them do a goblet, and just have them work around in here. Or, you know, you can have them use like a bar like that, something like this, and just kind of have them like walk their hands down the bar and just work on sitting deeper. Like that can be really, really helpful and beneficial. Like some of this stuff is going to be great. Oftentimes they just need to squat and practice, and they'll eccentrically learn how to drop deeper and deeper, right? If that's what they're concerned with, is the depth, or that's what you're concerned with, but they look pretty even and neutral, and they're moving the way you want them to do, they'll get there over time, especially as you continue to load them. You don't need to load them deeper than where they need to go, but if you work on dropping this thing down in space, right, over and over again, their body will adapt to help them with that. But you want to keep them in ranges that they have. So to your point about the butt wink, if you're training them in their butt wink, they're just going to get better at butt winking. You know what I mean? So what I would do is I would try to work on some other stuff to help them with that, but I just have them go as low as they can without it, just so that you know that they're getting it the right way. You know what I mean? And then they should be able to get deeper and deeper over time. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a good case study of that, is that I haven't really worked on stretching at all in the past like 3 years, maybe even longer. I don't stretch at all. And when I first started doing like hinges and deadlifts, I could only get down to like here, hamstring wise, right? And I just worked on it. I didn't go any deeper than I could, and I just worked on, you know, that motion, and over time, those tissues are going to eccentrically orient a little bit more my hamstrings, and now I can, you know, touch the floor with almost a straight knee, you know, and before I was like down to here. So it just like is going to happen over time for them too. So just by doing it is the best way to do it. You don't need like a bunch of like squat mobility stuff. 1 or 2 of these things maybe if you want to, just to accelerate the process, and just have them squat, right?
Yeah,
But
I would say like, because a lot of people came in and never like exercise before, so it's
right.
like having where you're doing the holding on,
Yeah,
letting
suspensions.
the body go into the position, and they get out of like the fear of the position. It's sometimes that's the most, it seems to be like one of the most practical things, because it's at least have the feel of the squat.
Yeah.
100%.
A lot of drills that don't feel like a squat.
Right.
They're just, oh, this is what it is. I can relax, and now I can do it.
100%. That's the lowest hanging fruit for sure. None of this stuff, you know, none of the other stuff that you do, you're not going to do ankle dorsiflexion stuff in place of a squat. It's going to be, the squat is the main course, right? And this other stuff is appetizers or things to help them feel better in that, right? But for the most part, like you said, just get their nervous system comfortable in a position that they can handle. And that's, you know, that's when this stuff comes into play too, right? So somebody who's like, you know, in terms of like front loading versus back loading, right? If it's somebody who's like kind of falling forward as they squat, right? You're not going to probably want to backload that person, because what's going to happen when you put the weight on their back? Where's their body going to go? It's going to go more forward, right? So if you want to teach somebody to not go here when they squat, but have them stay a little bit more upright, that's when you want to choose something that's a little more front loaded, right? So that's when you'd maybe want to go with like a goblet. Doesn't even have to be a heavy one. It's not necessarily that you're trying to load them through the roof, but give them a little something to put weight that way so that their body feels more comfortable. Instead of being here, they can be more here. Just let them come back in space with the pelvis and the rest of their body. You know what I mean? That's why for a lot of people, you know, the wedge and a goblet is going to be a great way to get them started, or a wedge in the suspension. Like you said, from a nervous system perspective, just get them comfortable with that position. But that front load for most people is what they're going to need to get pushed back. For someone like me, let's say, right, if we're going down the narrow path and I have a tough time putting force into the ground, I might need more of a back load, right? Because that's going to push me forward, which is going to get my knees forward, which is going to give me that pronation. And then if I really wanted to work internal rotation, right, that's that person that you'd want to back load them versus front load them.
Would you say you kind of live more on your heels then?
Yeah. For sure.
How can you tell you live more on your heels?
Some of it is through the positions that I'm in terms of like, this is stuff that I didn't really get into today, but the orientation of my tibias, as you guys can see, I'm like kind of like bow-legged and very externally rotated through that. And like we talked about, right, as I get into mid-stance, what's my tibia going to do? It's going to internally rotate, right? My tibias are not internally rotated, far from it, right? And because of my femur position too, I can tell where I'm at, but also I can just feel that I'm usually in my heels. You know what I mean? Like just ask people too, like, hey, where do you feel the weight when you're standing? You know, where do you feel? Like James was like,
I'm on my toes 24/7.
right,
So when you stand,
more compressed.
I have to consciously think about rocking back.
Right. So you might be someone where, all right, well, we're not going to backload you, right? We could, but you're already in your toes, and now you're just pushing more weight forward. So for you, a front, you know, a zercher, right? Even a safety bar would be kind of like middle ground maybe, right? Because you're backloaded, but the arms are in front, so you have that. But I would say, you know, like a zercher or a front squat for you. and just get you to find your heels, bring you back, right? We're always just trying to give people what they don't have. You know what I mean? Try to find out what's missing and try to help them with that. So just a couple of these other things, right? Heels elevated versus toes elevated, right? What's heels elevated going to do? We kind of talked about this already, right, with the wedge. But it's going to help them find their heel a little bit more, right? Well, they're going to be through their heels, but it's going to give them that plantar flexion. It's going to allow them to bypass the ankle, get the knees forward, drop a little bit more vertically, right? The toes elevated is going to do the opposite, right? It's going to push them back a little bit. So for you, maybe a toes elevated would be better too. Yeah.
So it's flip the wedge, and I've never
Yeah.
had anybody squat like that.
Yeah, you can flip the wedge, or you can just have them do like a small plate and do it like that. But if they're having, especially like, let's say like a hinge too, right? A deadlift.
We've done that for hinges.
Mm-hmm.
It's never been squats.
Yeah, for some people, especially if they're having a really tough time or there's too much force in their knees, right? Because your knee's going to take on a little bit more force when the heels are elevated. And maybe if that's just too much for them, just elevate the toes, and that'll just have them turn into what Jesse would call more of like a squinge, right? But it'll take a little bit of force off their knees and allow them to understand the squat and get still the quad and the glute that you want without.
It's kind of like a mirror message, right? It's kind of like saying, this is forcing them to do more work, but it's more of like the nervous system that's like picking up that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've never done that.
And that's going to give them more compression too, you know, because it's going to put them in that more dorsiflexion, whereas the opposite with the heels elevated where they're here, and that's going to, like we said, drop them down, be more expansive, more vertical. If you go here, that's going to give them a little bit more IR, you know what I mean, a little bit more internal rotation, a little more force, more hamstrings, that kind of stuff, right?
I've never thought about really pressure in the feet. I always thought about movement to the ankles.
Right.
In terms of like the wedges. So I never
It's the
thought
same
about-
thing though, I mean, yeah,
But I never thought about like I live on my toes.
right.
To counteract that by like I guess taking the toes more out of the equation.
Right. Exactly.
Other clients know that you have to do.
Right. And you still have them do the same foot pressures that we talked about before, right? You still want them maybe 60-40 heel, and then you can still have them push through the toes, whether you're on a wedge or the wedge is flipped, whatever, you can still have them do that same foot pressure stuff, but inherently, and it's going to change the shin angle too, right?
Activity-wise, like when I brought up athletes, a lot of people do sports like they live on their balls and their feet. If someone's like a lot of people do a lot of like distance work. Do you find those people live more on their heels, or is it?
That's a good question. It depends, because distance runners can be heel strikers, midfoot strikers, or toe strikers. Like you just ask them, you know.
It's not all over.
And they usually know. Yeah, it's all over the place. And they usually know. Like most of the really good ones are midfoot strikers, but a lot of them are heel strikers. So you'll just know by asking them, and then seeing, like, notice the shins, like we talked about, right? Do they look like they're rotated out? Do they look like they're rotated in, right? Jesse's are rotated out, but he's a toe-off guy, right? He's more supinate because you watch this guy jumps out of the roof, you know what I mean? So he has more of that end game of expansion at the very end with the supination. So he's got high arches, right? Externally rotated, but he's a more propulsive guy. I have kind of high arches, externally rotated, but I'm in my heels. And I'm more of that early phase, basically, right? So I need more IR. Jesse probably needs more IR too, right? But he's coming back to mid-stance, I'm going towards mid-stance. So that's where, again, the gait stuff comes into play. But again, like I said, blanket statement, we both need what we don't have, right? I'm trying to get to mid-stance, I'm trying to put more force into the ground, I'm trying to get better pronation, all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna do that stuff. Jesse's trying to get that too, because he doesn't have it naturally, right? Most people you find, especially in here, will be one or the others. They'll be the athlete, right? Thanks, guys. They'll be the former athlete who's like, let's go, who's just like ready to go at any moment. Or they'll be, really, really tight, the old person you get that can't, those are the type of people that, all right, well, have them find their heels a little bit, right? Have them get down and drop that thing down, right? Slow versus fast, same thing, right? Slow is going to be eccentric expansive, right? So that person that's really tight, or whatever, you might want to have them just go nice and slow. Fast, like moving really fast, right? So for me, I might want that. I probably want that because I need to learn how to put force into the ground, right? James, probably more of a slower one, right? Have him do it in the front, have him go slow, right? Me, maybe backload me, have me go fast, something like that. Front foot elevated, we talked about that, right? A little bit different shin position, a little bit more hip flexion, so it's going to be more expansive. Rear foot elevated, talked about, right? I'm going to be more forward, force into the ground, shin forward, all that kind of stuff.
Both those movements are kind of the same, where you're shifting front and back pressure in a sense. Like,
what do you mean?
Go more front foot elevated or rear foot elevated?
So they're different in the sense that the positions of where your body's going to be and your shin, right? So like we talked about, if I go front foot elevated, right? I'm here, I'm starting in a much different position at the shin and at the hip, right? So I'm going to be working mostly.
I would think that's your, when you go there, front foot elevated, you're putting more into the heel.
Right.
And then if you're going rear foot elevated, you're putting
More into the toe.
the
Front of the foot, exactly.
So
Yep.
you can think about that for those types of people also.
Absolutely, yeah, right? That's a great way to do it. So for me, rear foot elevators are really hard for me, but I love them, but because I'm not used to being in my toe and putting that force to the ground. I'm living in internal rotation here, right? These ones feel way more comfortable for me, right? And they don't feel as hard for me. So, right, just have them, you can use the foot where they feel the weight as a good guide to guide you in that. Loading too, right? Ipsilateral, contralateral. Ipsilateral is going to make it heavier on that side. It's going to drive compression, okay? So if you're having somebody do like an ipsilateral one of these, they're going to be even getting more compression. So more hamstrings, probably more adductors, right? More glutes probably, right? And if you have somebody go contralateral, it's going to turn them into that side. So it's going to relatively expand them a little bit, but that's going to be more rotated through here. And you're going to get more glute med, stuff like that. You know what I mean? Probably more quad. But yeah. So those are some of the things. I'm trying to think about other stuff that we do in here. What else you guys got?
So when we're talking about like loading and like barbell versus dumbbell, whatever,
Right.
stance. So I know stance is like different for everyone,
Right.
but I didn't know if like you had thoughts on
Mm-hmm.
a more common approach for like your average everyday. I guess
Yeah.
like what you said on like if they don't have it.
Right, right.
Thing. So like if someone is having a hard time expanding, what stance would be better for them in that sense?
I would put them, do you mean like in terms of foot position and all that kind of stuff, or just everything?
Like in what application would a wider stance be better for someone versus a more narrow stance?
That's a great question. I mean, the wider stance would be better if you're trying to get them to squat and get them to push weight and they don't have it yet, you know, going narrow feet. Like, I'm not saying you do one or the other. You'd probably have them go narrow too, but maybe just not load it, you know what I mean, a ton. That's going to allow them to just drop more and get more full range of motion. When they go wider, they're going to get more groin. They're going to get more lateral hip, right? But they're not going to get as much like glute max, not as much quad, not as much hamstring, you know, because you're just working the more oblique angled muscles, basically. So for the average person, right, most people don't have great dorsiflexion, right? You don't even really need to test it. You'll just see, and you can ask them to, like, right, are you getting any tightness in the ankles, whatever, or they'll tell you that. But most people don't have great dorsiflexion. A wedge is going to be a great place to start, right? And if they're having trouble, like they're leaning forward a lot or they're butt winking really early, the wedge is going to be a great place to start them out too, just to get them to like understand, okay, let's get the knees forward. And that's a big thing for people too. You'll ask people, and a lot of people that I see will squat like this on initial assessment. They're here, you know. They don't want to put any weight into their toes. They don't want to let their knees go forward at all. Maybe they heard that somewhere that they're not supposed to, right? That's something that we have to talk about, and we have to be aware of, that is still a thing that looms large in our community.
There's a lot of people that are still like scared of that.
Yeah.
Tell them to let their knees go over their toes.
Right.
They'll be like, oh, I was told to never do that.
Right.
You gotta know, no, you do that, that's okay.
The fact of the matter is there's no way around it in life.
Yeah.
If you want to like sit to a chair or go up the stairs or any of that stuff, like your knee will have to go past the toe. We want it to, right? It's going to every time we walk too, like we talked about, right? That positive shin angle. We get the toe off. Like every time you run, like you cannot run physically without getting your knee past your toe every single time. You know what I mean? So it's not something that we want to necessarily run away from. Yes, the idea was, okay, let's not put any force on people's knees, because if their knee hurts, we're trying to take the force off. So then let's just get them to send their hips back, and we'll send the force to their hips, also their back more so, right? But that's the idea. The force is going to go somewhere no matter what we do. The more those knees go forward, yes, the more force they're taking. But what are we trying to do here, right? If we want to get the biceps stronger, we got to load the elbow. That's where the force goes, and the shoulder, right? And anytime we're trying to get a training adaptation, like we're trying to load a joint. You know what I mean? So the knees have to get loaded if you want to train the quads through a full range of motion and the hamstrings through a full range of motion. So it's not something that we want to avoid. If it's somebody where their knee really like is not as having fits, you know, then yeah, you can start off by maybe doing more hinge-based stuff, or have them do a little bit more toes elevated maybe, right? Instead of heels elevated, because the heels elevated again is going to allow those knees to go further forward. So operate, oh, sorry.
So kind of, I think, kind of want to ask a question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Considering with our, like, let's say our private sessions, would you consider, let's say, because all of our squatters squat wide, basically, all of us.
Right.
Every single one of us, right? All of our clients do.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say squatting this way when we're working right now, starting off something like that, because I'm sure everyone will be able to squat this way, but very lightly,
Right.
very short,
Yeah.
and then getting into the squats that we all do, so
Yeah.
they could see like, okay, I'm doing this much weight.
Right, right.
Would that be a pretty good game plan or blueprint?
That's a great idea.
Right?
Yeah, yeah, because you don't want to deprive them of that. You know what I mean? You want to get them what they need, which is these motions at these joints. You know what I mean? But you also want to get them feeling really good about what they're able to do in here. You know what I mean? How much they're able to put on the bar. That's the stuff that they tell their friends about. That's the stuff that they leave here and they're like, damn, hell yeah, I'm making progress. I just put up 225 or whatever it was, you know? So yeah, I think that's a good idea. You don't want to really choose one or the other until they can fully load that pattern. I would say try to wean them off from the wide squat and just think of it as another challenge for them, right?
It's very, very, like it's all over the place. Like, there's some people that will go, it's kind of like getting them out of the ridiculous and getting them more into something that's, all right, we can work with that.
Yeah.
You know, some people will do like your shoulder super wide,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's people where it's like wide, and you're like, okay, we can work with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's people that will they have great squats, like
Mm-hmm.
right here with it. So
Right.
and then, yeah, there's some people where it's like, they're here, one foot's a little bit out there, but
Mm-hmm.
that feels better. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right, it depends on what your goal is. Are you trying to fix them, or are you just trying to slam weight on, you know? You can do both, you know? And that's what Jesse's saying, right? Like, just work on getting that range of motion just by having them squat. You don't even have to do any of this stuff, right? I'm just trying to get you guys thinking about kind of my lens about how I look at it and how you can think about when this weird stuff comes up where someone is doing that stuff, how to make some sense of it and what it might mean, right? But at the end of the day, right, like just get them doing it the right way, get them moving it, and then, you know, you don't have to load it right away. Load the patterns that they're comfortable in, get them strong, and then give them the little, I always say, like with my clients, I give them a little bit of what they want and a little bit of what they need. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times people don't like to do the stuff that they need.
I think that's where like
But you want to keep them happy.
Because we make them do it.
Right, yeah. And you know, we got to keep them happy. We got to keep them engaged.
Keep them confident.
Exactly.
Keep them confident.
Exactly. You don't want to strip them of all their stuff and be like, all right, well, until you can do it this way, like I'm not going to put, you know what I mean? Like, that's your job in here, is to get them, you know, strong and feeling good. So it's like, I think you got to have a good balance of that. Use it as like a mobility thing at the beginning, right? All right, I'm going to get you to squat narrow, whatever. Or put it just as a warm up. You know, I'm going to do 2 sets with the goblet and the heels elevated, and really get those knees moving over your toes a little bit, and allow that. We're working on the foot pressure. All right, cool. You're feeling good. Okay, you know, let's get the bar. We'll do a practice set with the bar, whatever, and then, you know, we'll load on from that in whatever way that they feel most comfortable, right? You don't want to take anything away from them. Still build them up, still let them do what they want to do, but just be thinking about how can I make them move a little bit better, right? Because if we just hammer on strength to somebody who wants to be here all day, they're just going to get stronger here. You know what I mean? So it's like we can have them do both and eventually get them to be a little bit better movers, you know? And the split stance stuff is great. Like, as much as you guys can get some of that in, you know? Whether it's regular split squat, rear foot elevated, front foot elevated, I love that stuff, and that stuff is really good for them because it allows like that to happen and that to happen, which makes them better movers, movement variability, right? If they're always here and then we have them squat wide, they can stay here and do this, right? Then they never get that, and they don't get that, and they don't get that, right? That's why I was saying earlier, the classes in here, it's great because we have the movement variability. So they might be doing a side shuffle, rotate, slam, side shuffle, rotate, slam into, you know, a heels elevated goblet squat or just a goblet squat or whatever, right? Into an alternating lunge, right? And you get some of this stuff. So that's good. You want to make sure that in your programs, you know, you're doing the split stance stuff. The single leg stuff is really great too. But everything changes because then you get rotation in the mix, right? So then there's there's hip shifting too, of turning your pelvis towards the knee we're working. So we kind of want to do that when we're doing the split stance stuff too. But that's a great way to load it, and it's a great way to give them some motion here. So just make sure if you're doing squat stuff with people, which you guys all are, like you're not just doing the double leg stuff, but get them going on some split stance stuff. Whatever you guys like the best. Like you don't even have to like take all of this stuff and try to formulate what you're gonna do. Just get them doing your favorite type of split squat, and it'll be a good thing because they'll at least get some movement happening here. You know what I mean?
I think especially like with, it's like client psychology, but younger clients, if you have people 20s, 30s, they all want to hit the bar and
Right.
weight up. And like if you just have them do split squats, and they'll start to get antsy because you're gonna see other people with the barbells and they want to do it. It's like
Right.
as long as they get the split squats in,
Yeah,
then like you just showed us, they're doing
Yeah.
all of that.
exactly.
So yeah, they can go ham on the
Yeah.
barbell.
Right.
And then like the warm up, or maybe just one of the accessory movements is split squat, so they're getting that. But
Yeah.
older clients, it's like you could just split squat them all. They just want to move and feel good, so they don't care. It's
Right.
They don't. A lot of them don't even want to see a barbell.
Right. And that's where it comes to giving them what they want and giving them what they need, right? Just like I said, like, yeah, know your clients, right? You got to keep them happy. You want to keep them, you know, feeling good about themselves and coming back and keeping them strong. So it's like you give them what they want. If the guy or the gal wants to barbell squat, let them do it. You know what I mean? Supplement with, like we talked about, maybe a warm up where you're doing some goblet, more narrow type thing, right? Let them go ham there, and then at the end, hit them with some rear foot elevated. You don't have to like be like, all right, we're doing like a corrective. Like, throw that bar on them that Mike's using over there. Do some rear foot elevated, or just heavy load them with a couple kettlebells, right? 2 kettlebells is going to make that front side really heavy. Obviously, like I said, contralateral is going to turn you towards that side, so it's going to give us even more of the rotation. Ipsilateral is going to kind of turn us away a little bit, but it'll give us that more pronation. Because, right, think about it. If the weight's out here, where's my body weight going to go? It's going to go that way. It's going to go this way, right? I load this way, my body wants to go this way. If the inside of my foot is this way, I'm going to get more pronation, right? And vice versa. If I load contralateral, so I'm here, weight's outside, where's my weight going to go? That way, right? So now I'm going to be more on the outside of my foot, right? So if I want to get somebody off the inside of their foot, maybe somebody who's flat-footed, we're going contralateral. Get them to feel the outside of their foot, right? If I have someone like James, who is like, arches like this all day long, I'm going to ipsilateral load you when we do our split squat, right? That way, everything's kind of going this way. And then it happens on its own. We don't have to sit there and work on, for 10 minutes with our shoes off. We can just do it. And you don't even know that it's happening, right? Maybe I tell you, maybe I say, hey, I want you to do this while you're doing it. But you're getting that. And you're getting the split squat, but you're also happy because you went in here and you maxed on squats, and you're hella tired. Because you're doing this, if you're doing this split squat stuff right, it's going to be just as hard as the two-legged stuff, if not harder. For me, that shit's way hard, So, what else?
What I miss?
From the top. No, but I think really what it comes down to ultimately is just that, right? Give them a little bit of what they need, right? A lot of people need hamstrings. We don't really work. I mean, you guys do actually a pretty good job, but like a lot of gyms don't really work that. You know what I mean? So you can get creative with that. A lot of people need hamstrings. A lot of people need groin. We don't need to do the band stuff all day long. If you want to throw it in every once in a while, I'm cool with that, right? Get them doing heavy stuff two-legged. Get them going split stance. Throw in some single leg every once in a while. Have them move in different planes. You guys do a great job of that. Better than anybody I've seen gym-wise anywhere. So good job with that. And that's why I like coming here. Because it's like you give people a good experience. Whether you guys know it or not, you get this doing all sorts of stuff, and you get this doing all sorts of stuff. It's really good for people. The people that get hurt are the people that come in every day. They do the same routine that their high school football coach gave them. You know what I mean?
We only work sagittal plane.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, that's how people break down. They're throwing the bar over, they're bunt winking, on heavy squats. They don't even know it. They don't know what that means. They don't know, what range they need to be operating in, and eventually, poof, there goes the back. But yeah, you guys are doing a great job. Just think about some of this stuff as in terms of like when you're doing, especially your private sessions of like, all right, like I know Jesse's talked to me a lot about this, but like you see people, right? Just notice where they like to be on their feet, right? What they're good at, what they suck at. Give them some stuff that they're good at, make it hard, challenge them, and do a lot of stuff that they suck at. Stuff they suck at is probably the stuff that they need, which you guys obviously already know, but anatomically, biomechanically, yeah. Any other questions on any of that? Lots going on. The good news is it all relates to the same stuff we're doing in here. It's just a way of thinking about why. That's all. Yeah. I'm still trying to figure it out though. This shit's really confusing and there's a lot to go through,
And you can spend so much time focusing on one specific movement.
Right.
What are your thoughts about like letting people move through somewhat what we would consider bad movement, but if it's not loaded or if it's, are you okay with things like that?
I think that's the key, what you said right there. If it's not loaded, I usually don't care too much. Depends on their injury history.
Especially in the calisthenics class. Like I'll see a lot of bad movement going on, but sometimes you got to get through that stuff to get to the good stuff.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, especially in the class, I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
If they're not loaded, some movement's good for them. I can't do all the stuff that we do like calisthenically in here. I'm not super limber, but going through that stuff is good for me. Even if I don't have a full range of motion, it doesn't look great. It's when you start loading them that it gets tougher because that's when they really start compensating and going like we talked about. If they can't get it from somewhere, if they can't get 180 degrees here and we're having them walk out at the top, but their shoulder doesn't go there, like you can't move where you can't move, so where are they going to go to? How many times have you guys seen them do that? Every day, right? So, okay, what can we do about that, right? Maybe we have them go half kneeling so they can feel their ribs and they can feel this easier. Oh yeah, I can feel my hips coming forward. Like sometimes when they're seated or when they're standing, they don't even notice that because they don't have that same proximity to the ground, right? So you put them here, they can feel that. Okay, what I'll have them do is I just say, stay out here, don't come back until you can come back. You know what I mean? You start out here, you start to come back a little bit, okay, that's where my range ends, boom, we'll operate in that range. Landmine, great one to use. Landmine, super safe, right? Because almost everybody has this range of motion, right? You're still gonna get serratus, you're still gonna get anterior delt, you're still gonna get, you know, a little bit of tricep, all that stuff that you guys wanna get, it's just in a safer range. So it's like thinking about that too from the class's perspective, risk mitigation, right? What do most people not have? You know, let's try to get them that. Not loaded though.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good.
I have a question about knee injury. So I have a client right now that has a ongoing meniscus issue.
Okay.
I've always been kind of like, what are the do's and don'ts with people with chronic injuries like that just never really go away?
That's a good question. Obviously depends on the type of tissue. Meniscus is like what we would call an inert tissue, which means it doesn't contract. So there's not a whole lot you can do about it. You can focus on the stuff that does contract. The meniscus is going to be pressured at like 90 the most and a little bit below that too. So hammer strength before they get to 90. That's what I would say. Have them do a lot of like split stance stuff. Like if they're trying to get really strong, you know, you can do the shorter range stuff, double leg, or have them do some split stance stuff where they're in those deeper hip range of motion, but they're not maybe in as deep knee range of motion, right? Or they just don't have to go quite as deep. Single leg stuff is great for them because it's going to be really hard muscularly, but they're never going to get to 90 anyway. So, you know, that's a good thing that you can do. Step down type stuff, you know.
So basically just don't push the 93 block.
For a meniscus, yeah, depends on where it is too, like medial, lateral, you know, but for the most part, like let pain be your guide. If they get pain at a certain point, it's probably going to be around 90 and below, and as they're getting down and up through that, and if they hurt there, don't put them there, you know, like.
I always notice
There's nothing wrong with it, right?
Yeah.
If it hurts,
Yeah.
don't do it.
Yeah, most people don't give a shit, you know what I mean? Like they just want to come in here and they not feel pain when they're here, not feel pain afterwards. If they get stronger, I mean, chances are they're going to feel better, you know what I mean? It's the lowest hanging fruit. Like we all believe that to our core. Like a lot of people, if you add strength to them, they're going to feel better. A lot of the little things are going to go away, you know? I can't tell you how many times I work with people with back pain, especially like older women, and their knees just like don't do anything. They just can't load them at all. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, you know, they haven't been using it. That's why the back hurts, right? Because they don't have any ability to disperse force below the back. And, you know, it's tough. But it's like all you got to do is give them a little bit of strength, right? And in a non-painful way, in a range that they can control. I have a woman that I'm working with right now. She has a tough time going downstairs. I have her double yoga blocked from the top step. She's going down like less than an inch probably. That's as much as she can do pain-free, just forward. And I'm just having her do that forward step down, literally 1 inch. And next week she'll be able to do 2 inches probably. You know what I mean? And I'll just, but if I go 3 inches right now, oof, ouch, you know? So I'm just not messing with that, right? Just if you guys have people that have pain, obviously, you know, try to work around it basically, right? Try to give them what they need. Think about how you can strengthen that without putting as much force into the joint maybe, right? But yeah, I mean, if you just give most people a little bit of strength around it, like they'll feel better, you know? It's just about for them dispersing forces, you know?
I was gonna just make a comment on the meniscus. So I had some experience with that where pressure on the feet changes
For sure,
on the pain on the meniscus.
right.
So I always play with that when I'm hinging at 90 degrees and it starts feeling the pain. I say, where are you pressing from here? Go in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Pain just goes away.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, just like let the pain be your guide and play with that. Even like just a slight lateral movement changes the whole outcome.
And that's why I say, like, depends which lateral meniscus, medial meniscus, right? If it's lateral, outer loading is going to be more tough, medial, you know. And then that's when you can start to think about this stuff too, right? If it's a lateral meniscus, which maybe they know, maybe they don't, you know, they probably got the MRI report 10 years ago or something and they had no idea what it said, whatever, you know. But if you know that on the outside it hurts, load them on the outside, foot will go to the inside, right? Ipsilateral. or vice versa. If they can't get on the inside, load them contralateral, let them find that outer foot a little bit, you know? That's where you...
have torn meniscus too. Right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I was seeing some where they were saying, I was like, there's a lot of people who don't even know and you have no pain. They look at your knee and you have a torn meniscus.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's a very...
I would bet most people do at a certain point, you know, or some sort of like fraying, you know.
So it's kind of like, sometimes when people know, it's like, now their knee's worse.
Right.
It's like, now like, oh, should I have a torn meniscus?
They're like, it's a diagnosis, I have it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But if you take a picture of most 50-year-old people, you know, they're gonna have some fraying on the rotator cuff. They're gonna have some wear down on the meniscus, on the cartilage, you know, around their knees and stuff like that. Like, that's just kind of how it goes. And right, like to your point, most people aren't going to be symptomatic with that. So that can be the danger of like going to get an MRI. Is like once you're like, oh, I have the diagnosis, like, ooh, now we should, you know, it's like, well, that might not even be why you're feeling pain, why you know, but whatever. But yes, a lot of people have meniscus tears, and they can be minuscule, they can be big. Again, that's why you got to let pain be your guide on that one. You shouldn't necessarily like write somebody off from going to 90 if they have that. You know, if they're coming to you like in pain and the meniscus has been a big issue, then, but hammer strength above that, and you know, in different ways and stuff.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Because my client, Patty, has I think she has a torn meniscus, but her knees are like, she won't do anything, like, her body. And I was trying to think of like, man, just to strengthen the quad, if she will now do body weight squats holding on to the bar, and she'll do RDLs, but I was trying to think of other things to like strengthen the quads. Like I was trying to think of a way to like do like leg extensions or something in here, but like
Mike's monkey feet.
Oh, with the yeah.
That's a great way to do it. I was just going to say like open chain stuff is really good for those people, meaning foot's not on the ground.
Yeah.
So that stuff you can hammer like, you know, hamstrings with those, or with other things. You could have them do the feet up on the wall or feet here. That might be comfortable for them. It's like same thing as we did here with Jesse and James, but over there you would just have your feet on the wall. Same idea, but okay. All right.
Like things I gotta work with.
Yeah.
She'll go on the bench.
You could do like a laying flat with a cable.
Yeah.
Angle. That's fun extension.
Yeah.
Like a laying down, like.
So for
on a cable.
another thing I was thinking, you know,
yeah,
you're
so
talking
I was
about like
talking to John.
walking down.
Yeah.
So think about that.
So I don't know, this is called Copenhagen? This means?
Yeah, we have the
Copenhagen's the like leg on the box.
It's a loaded beast, or
Jesse calls it a bear squat.
I
don't know.
Because that helps me determine how tight they are based on how their knees are elevating
Right.
and ranging.
Yeah.
So I try like, you know, give them that repetition to do that, but lower the knees so they
Yeah.
can stretch on their hamstrings and back.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the same thing with the wall, with the climbing down.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. I would say, like, personally, I would prefer that just because their feet are on the ground. Like, and that's going to be more functional to when they're pushing weight, you know what I mean, when they're doing squats and stuff like that. But, yeah, I mean, you're getting the same movement of hip and knee flexion. Yeah, same idea.
I kind of want to add, so
Yeah.
with Patty, I get, those are the people I get over there, clinic, and it gets tough because it's like, no, I can't do that, I'm gonna do that. I always start off with like, just it's funny you say it, because it's kind of I start off with the neural confidence, right? Like, look, it's okay, it's fine that you can do that. So sometimes I just start off with some knee flexions, like, hey, just go about it, get safe,
Yeah.
you're not hurting yourself, and then that turns into, all right, now we can squat, and then it grows into that, because
Yeah.
she's old. How old is she? She's up there, huh?
50s, yeah.
So,
50. That's so old.
no, but I mean that's the way I realize that over there. It's over here. It's like you just throw it out, but over there, it's kind of like you have to kind of play around with that mental part.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's tough, man. That's just dealing with people, and that's what we do. You know, people are scared to do stuff, and they had a bad experience once, and it's like, you know, so you have to meet them where they're at. Some days it's going to be a bad day, and you're like, okay, you know, not going to push you or whatever. And sometimes you need to know when to push them and say, hey, this is okay. Like, I'm right here. I'm going to, you know, whatever. But yeah, that's just part of being in the biz that we're in. And I think, you know, to that, if you can get them squatting a little bit, you know, if it's a range of, like, try to find out what it is. Is it a range of motion thing? She doesn't like going deep, you know? Is it?
We can hold on to the bar. She'll do body weight squats to parallel. Mm-hmm. It's just.
So she feels like maybe unstable?
Yeah. And then she's also like, I can't really get her to hold load. Mm-hmm. She's kind of like scared of weight in a sense.
Yeah.
She's tall. But it's like one of those things where I'm just trying to the body weight squats are cool, but I'm like, it's not really doing a whole lot to strengthen your quads. Like
right.
It's, yeah. I forget about the monkey feet. But I'm just like, if I could just literally just get you to just do some legging. And I told her, like, she joined LA Fitness to do like the treadmill. I was like, do some leg extensions for her. Just get on the treadmill, just do that.
You can have her go on the treadmill backwards.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
Just keep the treadmill off and just have her push, kick away. Same thing, you could take a sled. You can take one of those super bands and put it around the back of her knee too, and just have her standing here, and then just, you know, like a TKE basically. You know, and just work minimal range of motion, minimal, you know, instability, any of that. Just kind of put it right above the back of the knee there, and then just let your knee come towards me, yep, and then just straighten her out.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Like,
and you don't even have to hold it if you want. You put it around something like that, and then that way you can kind of like tactically cue her and all that. So.
Spanish squat.
Yeah, you could do those too. I'm not huge on those, but if she wanted to, that'd be like.
I've tried those.
You seen those? Yeah.
What's a Spanish squat? It's not like a sissy squat?
No, it's kind of the opposite, where you have like, basically, you'd have like something here, and then you'd go like this, and then it's holding you this way, and then you're basically like, you're squatting, but you're tall, and your hips are back.
That's called Spanish squat?
Spanish squat, yeah.
I've tried those. I think it's.
She might not like those. That's going to be a lot of load for her, though. I feel
they
like.
kind of get like really weird about it.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe a feel thing, but.
It's a little unnerving for some people.
So you can do it just like body weight squat.
It's like a hack squat, right? Is it the same as a hack squat?
I don't know.
It's a little different mechanic because you're kind of leaning. It's like holding you, so it's getting you. You're squatting and you're basically your shins stay.
Yeah, your shins stay vertical, right?
Shins in the squat. Hack squat. It's like actually we could maybe try hack squat like with a ball.
Okay.
But that's where you're getting more knee dominant, like straight down.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never seen that anywhere.
You guys look it up. No, I've never seen anybody do it over here. I've seen it in Spanish.
Spanish.
I've done it.
Pete, what you could also do, if she's willing to try it, obviously it'd take a while, but just get her doing like the knee forward stuff, like a miniature sissy, like kind of like Jesse was saying, yeah. And then if you can get her just doing like a little bit of this and just like a step down, but there's no step. She's more just stepping forward. Yeah, exactly. But you can have her go like a little slow, and you can have her hold it at the end. She'll feel all that eccentrically, right? Where this is going to be more like kind of concentric, of like you're squeezing to the end range basically, whereas that's going to be more like focusing more on going slow, like yielding, you know, and using gravity. But yeah, you could use the sled on her because she might be someone who it's here. But if she has a task to do, or she's like, oh, I'm not even thinking about, you know, what's happening down here. I'm just like trying to hold this thing and push. That could be helpful. Yeah, trick them into like, because a lot of them, they can do it. They're just scared to, right?
Yeah, tricking is probably one of the best things to do. They don't even know being tricked.
He said, just lie. Oh, man. All right, guys. Well, that's all I got. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Appreciate it. No worries. You were great.
That was really good.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.